Alright, so I'm going to try to get a comparison here about where the CVs sit. So kind of the before and after. It looks like 2 1/4 inches. And then I would say pretty much right at 2 1/4 on the passenger side. So we've got this bracket, how that sits flush, and then that bracket there. Alright, let's see if I can get you in here and show you what is going on. So this plate is completely opposite of what it needs to be. So the steering rack has 1 bolt over here on the right and 2 bolts over here on the left. Well, this plate is designed for a right-hand drive. You're gonna see the plate, it has a single bolt over here. Well, that's supposed to be because it's assuming that that bolt is on this side. And so the only thing that I can do with this is maybe drill the holes for those 2 bolts right there to line up. The problem is that's not going to line up, because if you can see here, this is cut away, and so this is not going to mate up with that. So this end is not going to be secured up top. That's going to be a problem. So I don't know, maybe once I get that side, the holes done, maybe there's going to be a way that I can get it secured on this side. I didn't have time to dial in the settings for the material. Overdid it, but I've got it, I think, where I need. I'm going to take the file, clean it up, and go from there. So I've been able to get the brace in, and I've got this bolt in. So what you do then, you have to get that dowel in. You know, once you put the bolt through, that goes in, and then this block goes on this side. So I did tighten that bolt down just a little bit to make sure that that brace is pulled snug to this side. Now I'm going to start getting the bolts put in for the rack. Then I will get that bolt in to support the differential, get it, start getting it back in place. So I have the support block on the passenger side, the bolt in to the differential so it's supported. So you put the bolt in through the top, put that sleeve in, leave that loose. Do not tighten those bolts up or you'll be loosening them back up, because you will need to wiggle this to move it. Same thing over here. This side was a bit more of a booger to get the bolt in, so you will want to leave all these bolts loose. Now you can go ahead and tighten up the bolts for the steering rack. You'll want to get that sleeve in there. You have to move this bracket around when you're putting this bottom bolt in. You know, all this will have to be moved around, and I had to use a pry bar, put a jack up under the differential to help raise it up, but then put a pry bar to help move it around to get that lower bolt in, and also to move that bracket and get everything lined up. So now I'm going to go through and looking at getting everything tightened up. The dilemma is I have a Hefty Fab engine skid, and it utilizes these bolts. I also have a radiator skid that utilizes these bolt holes here along this front cross member, and this plate, well, it obstructs that. They did not put any holes in this plate for those, so that's going to be a dilemma. Plus, I'm going to put my Hefty Fab skid on with everything now sitting, and I've measured this. This is 2 inches lower. So if you can see that, I'm measuring from the center of that upper bolt to the center of that lower bolt. That's 2 inches. So the differential has dropped 2 inches. Basically it's rotated, guys. Let's be clear here. And then you know, because it's still got to be able to clear, you know, that front drive shaft. So the whole thing is not dropped 2 inches. It's basically just rotated 2 inches. And sadly, you're not gaining 2 inches at the CVs. So if we go back up here and measure, this side's measuring right at 1.5 inches. And I'll look back and verify what I was measuring before. I think it was 2 inches. So we have gained 1/2 inch. I'm not going to say that that's meaningless. You know, 1/2 inch of angle reduction is notable for sure. So I'm just going to get the that bracket up here, that brace, get it bolted in. You know, I want to see what the finished product looks like without doing any more modifications. Then I want to put my hefty fab skid up here. I want to see what my clearance is going to look like. You know, you've got your 2 bolts up here. Now I had to cut those, create those. So that one, I just used a larger washer to kind of, you know, make that plate into place. And I think that it'll hold. It holds up against that bracket. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Certainly one criticism for the Caribbean 4x4 is I could not find any instructions. All I had was just kind of, you know, use of some common sense and the images that they sent. So what you're going to need to do is remove any plate, skid, you know, whatever is in place here that's going to be obstructing your access. You know, you're going to need access to the front part of this cross member, like, you know, changing your oil, so directly underneath the radiator, so like your, you know, kind of radiator skid, you know, right through here. So you need access there, and under the engine. You will need to remove the 2 bolts for the differential. It's not too heavy. I recommend at least having a scissor jack. That way it just kind of helps to you know, support the weight. You know, as long as it's not in your way, I would say, you know, go ahead and put the scissor jack up under the differential here. And I did put a board here just to get it up a little bit higher, but you know, just go ahead and do that as you take the bolts out. That way it doesn't, you know, rotate down. Once you have that out of the way, that's pretty much all that's in your way. You know, at that point, you know, then you've got this larger plate here that is going to go into place. Here's the skid plate portion of it, and this is supposed to bolt up, but naturally I don't have a bumper. Otherwise, it connects to these 2 points, and this is the primary function. These are the outer brackets to help keep it in place for the kind of torsional forces. This will hold that in place, so it just kind of helps keep that in check. Otherwise, this skid plate, the only other function I can see it serving, it does help to protect this diff, you know, that's you know, now lower, you know, with the exception of the mounts. Kind of a criticism here, not that it's probably a big deal considering the mounts, but these bolts and why they have this thick washer here and then the bolt, that to me is more cosmetic. And while it does look nice, it just extends that bolt down further. And you know, if there's a concern about an impact here, you know, this makes it more likely to be impacted. Whereas, you know, if they had designed this to where that bolt was recessed, then that would be protective. That would actually serve a purpose. Otherwise, my suggestion would be just use a washer. Yeah, I don't really see the benefit of that. That to me just makes things more likely to be impacted. If you do get this, regardless of right-hand, left-hand drives, my suggestion is either get one of those aluminum bolt protectors where the bolt can be recessed up in there. I don't have one large enough, or just use a washer and gain at least 1/4 of an inch to where, you know, that's pulled back a little bit and not as likely to be impacted. And you can see an example of what I've got. I've not got any bolts here. You know, really all that's going to be able to hold that up is one bolt up here, and I could probably push that over to get a bolt in there if I wanted to. But now this has been impacted on my truck, so that's probably playing a bit of a role, more so than the plate. But otherwise, this hole down here would probably line up. Let's see if it lines up over here. It does not. It hangs down, so we'll probably need to put a jack under here. I did try last night to install my Hefty Fab skid plate here, and of course it will not go. It's a much sharper angle, so it would need to cut across here. You know, I would need to cut this to get it to work, so that's another reason why this needs to come off. So it's not going to work with this skid, and it's not going to work with my engine skid either. This differential now sits too low, so these brackets sit too low. So even if we try, you know, we're going to line it up, of course, where this goes, so it doesn't even line up with where these holes are going to go. I was hoping it would sit inside, and I thought, well, maybe I could cut some holes and fit it, but it sends it about 2 inches too far to the passenger side. Otherwise it would fit inside. But so let's line it up with the holes. Might even be closer now. So if we line it up about with the holes best I can, that's going to be about as close as I can get it. So you know, if you can see that, I am literally, yeah, I'm 1.5 inches too low, so I'm losing 1.5 inches of ground clearance even at this point. You know, so even trying to sit it up inside there, that does not gain me anything, because this lower portion of the diff bracket, it still sits too low. So if I cut into this shield or even the other one, okay, I might be able to get it up another 1/2 inch, but I'm still going to be 1 inch too low. And so I'm losing 1 inch of ground clearance, and that's significant. You know, even with 35s, I mean, that almost negates the 35s, especially right up front. You know, I will say that I think I could modify that Caribbean 4x4 skid by cutting off this section up here that, you know, comes forward, that would try to bolt up here to the old bumper location. You know, I think I could eliminate that had maybe they just developed it where it was a full skid. And frankly, I don't know why they didn't. Maybe it was just cost savings, I don't know. But that is kind of, you know, I guess that is a criticism that I give them. As good as I think the design is, I don't know why you would design this setup knowing that it drops it like it does, and then not just go ahead and extend it on back to these mounting points here on both sides, and just go ahead and do a full engine skid, you know, and cover this whole area. You know, to me that makes perfect sense. Honestly, if this had been a full engine skid, if they'd made it to where it came back and bolted up at these 2 points, even if it didn't have the holes here for the Hefty Fab, I would have cut those holes. I would have modified it, put those holes in there, you know, run those bolts, and then trim this forward section, and then install my radiator skid. That would have been ideal. Their skid plate just comes back, you know, right back to basically the oil pan is where it stops. It's just a diff skid plate is all it is. So I mean it comes back here. So we're talking about another 8 inches. Yeah, that's a 1/4 inch piece of steel. All right, guys, so final thoughts on the Caribbean 4x4 Diff Drop Bracket kit. I think it's a well-built kit. You know, I'm going to establish that from the forefront. I think that you know, the thickness of the material, the welds are really exceptional. I can't find a flaw or criticism anywhere there. The hardware, the bolts, I think are you know, quality material. I did end up stripping one, but I was really tightening the far out of that thing. So I'm going to take ownership of that. Things that certainly stood out. Of course, it's for a right-hand drive vehicle. Talked about that. Not for left-hand drive. It's going to have to be modified. So that's not a criticism either. It was not built for left-hand drive. That's just inherent of anybody looking at buying it. Now, if Caribbean 4x4 resolves that issue, reverses that plate, then that changes a lot of things for sure. Now let's though get into, I think, the kind of meat and potatoes of it. Who needs this? Certainly, if we're talking someone who has a pretty significant lift, I think arguably over 3 inches, I'll say, of lift, where you know, you are approaching binding of the CV axles, you know, at full droop, then I would argue that, yeah, okay, this could be a benefit. So looking at the measurements, the bracket, drop bracket, lowers the differential 2 inches, right? That's the measurement. Based on what I'm seeing, it will decrease the angle of the CVs by 1/2 inch. I think that's a pretty decent shift. So when we look at full droop, is that sufficient to eliminate binding? I did not personally test that. I did not look at that. I did not have time to do that. So I will say in what I did, that was a limitation in what I did. So the final thing then, with that 2 inches of drop, anyone who is going to be lifted to that extent, the majority of people who are going to have that significant of lift are going to be off-roading. Not everybody. Sure, you got the mall crawlers, you got people who lift just for looks. But I think the majority of people, they're going to be off-roading. They're going to have skid plates installed. The number one issue with this Diff Drop kit is that 2 inches prevents you from installing an aftermarket skid. I see no way around it. If I were to modify my Hefty Fabworks skid, it would compromise it. It would destroy it. It would be useless at that point. If Caribbean 4x4 would take their skid and bring it back 8 inches, keep it the same width, you beef it up a little bit, put some 90-degree edges on it, bring it on back 8 inches to where it bolts up to that cross member behind the oil pan, I think they have a solid product. The only thing for me that would be a problem is the front portion that protrudes out. I understand why they do it, why they did it that way, and for some people that's maybe what they need. But for me, that front portion, the way it sticks out and bolts up to the front bumper section, I would have to cut that off in order to utilize my aftermarket radiator skid from Hefty Fabworks. You can easily modify that bracket to fit left-hand drive vehicles. Elongating this hole, creating this hole. Of course that's where the single bolt should have been, or originally was, in this bracket. And here we have where these two holes are. Of course those become useless now. And then this is where the single bolt is for the left-hand drive. So Caribbean 4x4, if you want to just extend this out, I mean, that bolt goes about right there. You know, you can see where the washer was, so you know, if you want to put that hole right there, this bracket will work. I'll even say this: if you want to send me another one, I'll test fit it. You know, for anybody watching this, you know, I'd pay for this. I paid for it 100% out of pocket. This wasn't sent to me. This isn't something that I was asked to review. This is something, you know, they advertise it, and I said, hey, you know, let's see if it works. Let's see if it fits. So I 100% paid for this. There was no discount, no compensation, anything. Okay, so so arguably, because it's not going to work for me, it's 100% loss. But you know, when I have the ability to do it, that's, you know, the kind of stuff I try to do, you know, help give you all some feedback on product. And if there are any updates from Caribbean 4x4, I'll let you all know. Take care.